everyone, and welcome to our first Google Plus Hangout edition of Still Growing. And my guest today is Stephen Devloo of Earthworm Technologies. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm very happy to be your first I guess, interviewee.
It'll be exciting. We're going to take the audio from this and we'll use it on the podcast. So the podcast episode will go live probably in a couple of weeks. So for the folks who are watching the show live tonight, they get a chance to kind of preview what's going to be on the podcast later on in the month. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You have a fascinating background because you didn't start out in horticulture because you were an MBA graduate with a career in corporate finance, right?
That's right. Yeah, my background is on the corporate finance side. I went to University of Chicago and studied economics, and then went back and got my MBA, and spent most of my years doing investments and investment banking, and also looking at buying out of companies and financing smaller mid-sized companies. And the last few years, I've had an opportunity to look at different things, and always sort of gardened on my own as a stress relief for myself, and got deeper and deeper into that in organic living. And a little light bulb went on in the last 2 years or so, where I thought I might be able to come up with a solution to help sort of divert all the food scraps going into landfills.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit about where you live and where you garden now.
So I currently live in Connecticut. I've also lived in Chicago before, originally from Belgium, Europe. And my corporate finance job took me to New York City, where I met my beautiful wife, and now we live in Connecticut. So we're Zone 6 gardening.
Awesome. So before we get into the nitty gritty here, let's review some of the common terminology we're going to be using, getting into your field of expertise. Um,
Sure.
Verme or werme is the Latin term for worm, and so that's why so many of the terms that you're using start with that root word.
Right.
That's the prefix for a lot of things in your industry. So let's kick it off with vermicompost.
Sure. Well, vermicompost is essentially, the I guess the product of what worms produce, basically. So it's
Okay.
typically a mixture of whatever you're composting. So in our case, it's food scraps as well as a carbon source. Some people use horse manure or whatnot. So there's the natural decomposition and composting of that, along with a mixture of worm castings. Um, we and that probably you're probably wondering, casting sort of the next thing.
Yep,
Cast
that's the next thing.
Okay, castings are pure, sort of the byproduct of the worm specifically. So if you're sifting it down uh, on a more refined basis, you'll get a higher concentration of worm castings, which can be a part of vermicompost.
Okay, so then what is vermiculture?
So vermiculture is essentially just a term that's used for worm growing or worm farming.
Okay.
It's just the practice of raising worms, and some farms, some farms are known to be worm farms. So there are businesses out there that basically raise worms for that sake only, and they may sell it to anglers, fishermen, maybe other vermicomposters, and they concentrate purely on giving a perfect environment for the worms in order to increase that population. And then there's also the aspect of more of what I'm doing, which is using the worms to actually compost feedstock.
So then what type of worms are ideal for vermicomposting for what you're doing?
So there's many different kinds of worms out there, and the ones that you would dig up in your soil typically are not the same kind that you would use for ideally for vermicomposting. The most ideal worm for vermicomposting, or the one that's mostly used, is a red wiggler worm. They tend to be thinner, smaller. I think they're a little cuter.
Okay.
My wife freaks out sometimes when she sees a big, one of those big fat worms in the soil. They're not quite like that. Um, but they are top feeders. So they essentially come
Okay.
to the top of, whatever, whether it be a tub or container or whatever you're using, and feed from the top. So there's many different ways that you can go about vermicomposting, but that is different from other types of worms, or like night crawlers have been mentioned before. They tend to be deeper burrowing worms and might not be ideal for home vermicomposting.
Now, how does the term organic apply to vermicomposting or vermiculture?
So, organic is sort of one of those terms that was, kind of created over the last, I don't know, 60, 70 years, because we started using, conventional farming methods, a lot of the chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and things that we use. So it's interesting when we use organic in the term of, sort of vermicomposting. And I'd like to think of it as trying to come up with as pure of a product as possible. And that means also, concentrating on your feedstock and making sure, because just like our bodies, whatever you put in is what you get out. So if you're eating
Yeah.
junk food all day long, well, your body isn't going to be too healthy.
Yeah.
One could essentially feed anything to a worm and get some sort of castings, but the end product will vary significantly, in quality depending on what you use. So we choose not to use the leftover leaves or anything from the municipalities, because we don't know whether it's been chemically treated or not. We can't
Okay.
be assured of that. There has been some research that shows that worms do break down a lot of those things, but we try to be as pure as possible when it comes to that. So helping the environment by taking food scraps, but we're not accepting just anything like oil and food scrapings. Some people do that, but we try to zone in on a good quality product.
Okay. So, I know we haven't talked about this, but then what is the worms are living in? I mean, I know you're trying to add organic matter to or for the input, but what do you start out with?
Well, so you know, a home vermicomposter could essentially, usually they encourage that you use your food scraps or whatever you need, and then you need bedding. So you could use,
Hmm.
waste paper, newspapers, hay, things like that, fiber source. We tend to actually pre-compost all our things, all our feedstock first.
Oh, you do?
Yes, we do, because we look to take out the pathogens and weed seeds, although we don't really have that much issues with that. Um, but it helps break down the whole feedstock first, so it's easier and also faster and more efficient for the worms to break it down. So for us, that's not that much of a problem.
Okay. How about Verma tea?
Vermity. So vermity, there have been many different terms used in the industry that get very confused, I think. A lot of people talk about warm tea, which I guess, vermity, as some sort of an extract that you take from the vermicompost. There are some articles out there that aren't quite correct. I've seen some articles out there that talk about running water through your actual vermicompost system and then collecting that. Um, that tends to be leachate. So, leachate isn't quite the same thing as worm tea. It can have toxins in it, and it can be very concentrated, so you can burn your plants. So you have to be very careful with it. We don't suggest using leachate as worm tea, but what I look at, and I tend to call it an extract, some sort of an extract, is using an end product of worm castings or vermicompost, and then steeping that in water. And some people do also add, some sort of an aeration system to boost the microbial population and add a sugar source. But that tends to be very short-lived, because the microbes eat all the molasses or sugar or whatever people add to it, and then they crash, and then everything goes anaerobic and kind of smells and isn't good. So we tend to just use extract products by taking our worm castings and steeping it in water for a period of time.
And adding too much water like that to your worm's environment, that can't be good for them, right?
No, in fact, that's it's really important. Just like in the regular composting process, Worms are living beings just like the rest of us. You want to have a proper mixture of food and moisture, oxygen, the pH level of the bin. These are important things, or your worms will die, won't populate properly, or won't be, transforming that feedstock properly. So yeah, adding water probably isn't the most ideal thing.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, do even the most experienced worm farmers need to start over from time to time?
I think, yeah, probably.
Okay.
I went to the vermiculture conference, and things can always happen. And there's many different ways you can go about vermicomposting. Out west, people can do things outdoors because the weather's great, and out east and in the north, not so much. You have to think about insulation, and um, we have weather issues, they have pest issues, birds like worms. So there's definitely, scenarios where things can happen, and your population can die. But I think you can come up with proper systems to mitigate that.
Okay. How about acidity? What is the optimum pH for worms?
You know, the red wigglers have a pretty big range. Um, they're pretty resilient worms, so they have a pretty big range of temperature and pH levels that they can live in. But most ideal is really the closest to neutral as can be. So sort of
Okay.
6.5 to 7.
Awesome. Now, all businesses have great stories of their beginnings. Tell us about the beginning of your company, Earthworm Technologies.
So as I was saying before, I was really into organic gardening before, and got probably you might, like most gardeners, you start off slowly, you start learning things, and as you get excited because you're doing things right, you start learning more. And finally got to the point where I was looking at composting because I had extra food scraps, in at home that I didn't want to throw in the landfills, or in our garbages, and we started doing that at home, and came across vermicomposting several years ago, and what an efficient, proper and efficient way was to deal with that, food scrap waste. And as I was researching more and more about that, the benefits of worm castings and vermicompost are really so many more than you can even get from compost or even aged manure. There's a lot of things in common, of course, but I was looking, more and more into that, and thought, wow, what a great product, and what a huge waste issue we have in this country. Everything, gets thrown into garbage bags and then thrown into landfills, where essentially there's no oxygen that helps, naturally break down food scraps, for instance. So it goes anaerobic. It causes, a buildup of methane, which is a greenhouse gas that's 25 times worse than carbon dioxide. Um, and most of it doesn't get composted or anything. So I started thinking a little bit, and came up with Earthworm Technologies as a way to basically try to set up some sort of a conversion program, and get people and businesses to start diverting food scraps from going into landfills, and instead giving it to me, and we can divert it from landfills, and at the same time also focus on coming up with a very strong soil amendment that we can put back into our earth.
Yeah, something you were very compelled to take a stand on and basically turn into your livelihood, right?
Right, essentially.
Now, I noticed one of the things that I love about going to your website is you have that great video at the very beginning of it, at the very top of your website, and it basically illustrates what happens to our food waste. It's a real shame, isn't it?
It sure is. It's a nice illustration. I left the source on the video. It wasn't done by me personally, but it's a very nice illustration for people to go to and really show what goes on with our food, because I don't think a lot of people realize it.
No, I agree. Now, your mission statement is also pretty awesome. Was that something you knew right off the bat, like it was fully conceived for you, or did it evolve over time?
Yeah, it's one of the first thing that I think I thought of, and it was quite easy. I thought it's So essentially, my mission statement is a kind of a multi-step statement, and the first one is really, make it cool, easy, simple, fun for people to basically recycle. Um, and I think that goes back to, I just remember having a friend in college, and we went to go visit his older sister, and she was into gardening and composting and all that stuff. And I just remember being at her house, and like there was a smell, in the kitchen, and she was, decades ago, and actually still now, you have a bucket and you throw everything in there, and as soon as you close that, you're blocking all oxygen, which is essentially what we do in landfills, and putrid smells start, building up, and things get slimy because there's a lot of nitrogen, and so we wanted to think of, as part of our process, something that, would not smell, and we've had pretty good success with the way we do it. And that's what keeps people kind of interested as well. So we're trying to change that kind of educational front. At the same time, also as I mentioned, diverting food scraps from going to landfills, and also in the same process creating what we think is a premium product. So we really concentrate on a high quality product. But in addition to that, just with the economy, where it's been, over the last 5 years or so, the U.S. has been sort of in trouble. We manufacture everything outside the United States, and I think we're great at innovating things, and we've kind of lost our process. So we also support U.S. made products, as well as pushing or supporting local hiring. So we don't really have too many hires right now, but that's definitely something we're sticking to for the future as we grow. And we also, I'm also big on charitable contribution, so I'm making that part of the mission statement and the operations as well. So it's one of those things. When I first started thinking about, what did I want to stand for, and those were the things that came up.
That's awesome. Now, I know that there is still a lot of, you mentioned educating the public, but for yourself, you also need to stay current in your field, in your particular niche. And when you and I talked earlier, you mentioned some of the research that's been done by Cornell University.
Right.
How do you stay current in your market? What are some of the sources that you like to refer to time and time again?
Well, it's a lot of book reading. There's a lot of great books out there. Also, as I mentioned, Cornell University has done a lot of, has made a lot of strides in specifically vermicompost research, and applying that to, different methods of disease suppression, increased germination rates, things like that. I attended the vermiculture conference earlier, or actually late last year. That was helpful in trying, talking to other people that are doing the same thing. Grand scale operators, small scale operators, as well as professors showed up and shared their research. So, I definitely think that people, that are interested in this area should, stay on top of that research, and just constantly reading. I mean, there's always new things coming out, and a lot of new people and businesses that are coming into the industry are, tend to want to share, their findings.
I know in some of our previous conversations, you mentioned the book Teeming with Microbes. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great book. I think a lot of people glance over it because it's kind of a microbiology book, but it's very well written. I think anyone can pick it up and follow along with it, but it really goes kind of hand in hand with organic gardening, which is all about the soil. How can we make the soil healthier? It really goes more into detail about all the different elements of what make a healthy soil, and once you start thinking that way, I think worlds open up, and especially if you're a composter or a vermicomposter, I think if you start focusing on this book and what it has, what it has to say, you can start thinking about how do I get the best quality product that I can personally produce.
I loved one of the first things you shared with me was the soil test or the shovel test to determine whether or not you had healthy soil. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, it's a very simple test, and it's one of the many things that I read. And when I come across good tips, I try to tweet them around, and put them on Google Plus. And So this is pretty easy, get a spade. We all have one for gardening. You go into your soil, go into your backyard and just pick up, just shovel up one spade of soil. And, if you have at least 5 worms, you're probably pretty good. But if you have less than that, you probably have some soil issues. So at that point, would highly suggest, getting probably a soil test done, make sure the pH levels are fine, or if you need more organic matter, amending your soils with compost and worm castings and things like that. So, but it's kind of a quick and easy way to tell, because earthworms will thrive where the environment's great, and they'll leave where it's not.
Absolutely. I love your logo too. I know it's something that you gave a lot of thought to. Can you describe your logo for folks who are listening who haven't seen it yet? And then also tell us how you developed your logo, because you put a lot of thought into it.
Right. So the logo is one of those things where my wife and I kind of came together, and when I was discussing the idea for the business, and I guess it's pretty simple, because there's Earth, the globe in it, and as well as a earthworm. So it's I guess not that creative, but you had many different ideas for it, and this just seemed like the most optimal way of going about the logo. There was, I put a lot of thought into it, because there's a lot of composters and green type of businesses, and they tend to have green and brown colors, and more logos that I think we're all used to seeing. And as part of the industry and what I'm doing, I'm trying to, I use social media a lot. I try to educate and teach people what's going on with the environment, because some of us know and some of us are too busy with our daily lives to realize. So I wanted something that people could kind of latch onto, and something that was easily brandable across the blog that I keep, as well as the social media efforts that I do, and eventually, of course, the marketing of the actual product. So I ended up using a crowdsourcing model where I created a contest, basically. So put a spec out there for what I was looking for, and I had several designers come in with ideas, and then fine-tune it from there.
And kids were motivating for you, right? When you were designing your logo.
Yes, actually. I mean, that's part of the educational process, trying to educate our future generations. And I wanted to, I always try to think bigger picture. You should definitely have a focus, I think, when you're working on an entrepreneurial idea. But you should also have your eye on, what if my idea is actually very good and it grows, and, let's think about, kind of the bigger scope, and then focus on the immediate scope for now. So part of that was, how can I, obviously brand a logo, and how can I educate, and of course also, who knows, going to schools and educate children, and what could they relate to, and most people can go on our website and see the logo. It's it's kind of a cute cartoony worm with a leaf sticking out of its mouth next to the earth. So and we also chose the colors to be a little bit different, still feeling environmental, but something that would be different from the rest. So we made the worm orange. It was originally green, and I didn't want it to be mistaken for a pest control company. If it was a bug or something, a slug.
Well,
So
I think
it
he's
worked.
adorable. This little guy is totally adorable. And I mean, you even gave thought to, I mean, how much of a smile this little guy should have. Let me see if I can blow him up on my iPad here. I'll just kind of show him. Well, I don't know if anybody can see that, but he is adorable. Let's see. This is Sam.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There he is.
He is just cute as can be, but he's got kind of a smile. His mouth is open, so he's chewing.
Right.
And there was some debate over his eyebrows too, right?
You actually remember that?
I do remember that.
Yeah. When he first came out, he had like kind of an eyebrows facing down, and he looked very angry. Like angry. And part of me kind of like that, because we're angry that we're doing all
Passion.
these things to the world, and the worm should be angry at us, and telling us to do something. But I thought that would turn off some people, so I wanted to make him happy, nice happy. So yeah, we went through the eyebrows, the different mouth shapes, and even the leaf. There was like, I think there was a banana peel before, and so there were a
Oh
few
wow.
things that we played around with, and this was the final results.
Awesome. So I know educating people is something you're passionate about. You have a very, friendly logo, a very, worthy mission statement, but you still have to educate people, right, before they can get on board with what you're trying to accomplish with your mission statement and with your organization. Could you share some of what you've learned about the issue of food waste in our country and what happens to it once it leaves our homes and why vermicompost is such a good solution?
Hmm, that's a loaded question. Well, in the U.S., as we all know, predominantly, especially in urban areas and even in rural areas, we create garbage at home. We do have some recycling programs that have basically grown over the years. Plastics, paper, things like that. But food waste still gets thrown into garbage bags, which I'm sure everyone that is watching or listening can relate to. Whenever you're done, you're cutting your broccoli, you have the stalks, you throw in the garbage. Carrots, potato peels, and food scrapings, everything you throw in a garbage bag. When you're done, you tie it up and you throw it in a big garbage can outside. So you then, the waste hauling companies come by, pick all those things up, take it to a transfer station, dump everything there, and then, depending on your municipality, they might, have a solution for it. Some of it might get incinerated, which create issues, and other things might actually, other garbage might actually be taken and hauled off to a landfill. So, essentially, if you want to think about that, I don't think a lot of people think about what that actually means. I mean, we're talking about picking an area, digging a hole, throwing all that stuff in there, and then capping it off when it's closed. So in the United States, we create over 500 billion pounds of total waste per year, of which, the percentage kind of changes, but say about 15% of that is food waste. So 80 billion pounds of food waste to get thrown in the landfills. 97% of that goes to landfills. There are obviously some organizations and farms and things like that compost. So, but that's still adds only up to about 3%. And if you want to put that in perspective, a family of four, there's a lot of things we do, right? We overbuy and we end up wasting food.
Absolutely.
I think there was a statistic I read that about 25% of the food prepared or purchased gets thrown out.
I
So
can
that's
believe that.
pretty wasteful. Yeah, we go out and we buy 8 bananas and we don't get to that eighth one, it turns brown. It's not quite the way we like it, so we throw it out.
Yep.
Um, Food waste is the third largest category of municipal waste in the United States. A lot of landfills are already being closed up, and as I mentioned before, when you throw food waste into a landfill and there's no oxygen to really help out with that aerobic process, it turns anaerobic, so it creates methane. It's a very different process than when you're actually actively composting it. And as we know, methane and carbon dioxide are not great greenhouse gases, but methane is about 25 times worse than carbon dioxide. Food waste is the number one material taking up landfill space, and landfills are the third largest source for methane in the United States. So it's all terrible things, especially when we have solutions to take care of these problems. We can't keep stuffing all our garbage in the earth and then it goes nowhere.
Yes. Well, and I know a lot of people are probably thinking to themselves, I mean, in terms of vermicompost, how does that differ when you think about other types of compost products like manure compost and all the varieties that are on the market today? How does vermicompost compare to those different types?
Right. So all those things are good. I mean, you need manure management too. A lot of dairy farms, horse farms, pig farms, manure creates methane. So, composting manure and aging it is a very good method to manage the manure on farms. It has bacteria and nutrients and things like that. It can go back in the soil. Compost is the same thing, and for those who might not know the difference, composting is essentially trying to come up with a nitrogen and carbon ratio that's ideal, sort of 30 to 1, and then the natural process of microbes building up and feeding off and decomposing that feedstock, I guess, takes over and creates heat, and then increasing the heat will also, get rid of pathogens and weed seeds and all those things, and eventually, depending on the process that you use, whether it's in windrows or you're using, bins or tumblers, you can come up with a soil amendment at the end. Those are all great things to do. Obviously, I think worm castings takes it to another step. The microbes that are found in worm castings have been found to contain up to 100 million microbes per gram. So about 20 times more that can be found. If you weren't looking at worm castings, it creates soil structure, porosity, it can neutralize, normalize pH levels. So it's great if your soil is off. Is more alkaline or more acid, more acidic. So it creates a better root environment for any plants, flowers, edibles that you might be growing, and it adds, more importantly, a microorganism, environment, which and if you read the book that I mentioned earlier, it would describe why that's all important. It's too scientific to get into now, but it's really beneficial in general, and can actually. When you think of conventional farming and the use of fertilizers, we've become a nation of, want it now, want it quickly, and we've essentially created a conventional farming method that, where we're mass spraying pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and providing chemical fertilizers, and what we're doing is we're creating a lot of issues, because the pesticides and everything are killing everything. So they're killing, good bugs, good pollinator, bees, butterflies, ladybugs, things like that. It kills everything. I mean, they're not going to sit there and start figuring out which is bad.
Yeah, they don't discriminate, do they?
They don't discriminate at all, and they get rid of good microbes too. I think we always think of, microbes and bacteria, oh, it's bad, I got to wash my hands, but that's, not necessarily true. There's a lot of very, very good beneficial bacteria that you start killing off as well, and that's why you're killing off the soil. And, worms eat off of that bacteria. They're not eating the food, they're really actually eating the bacteria that's breaking down that food. So that's the reason why you tend to find, a decreased worm population in conventional farmed soils. So, bringing all those things back would the organic matter that's been stripped from the soil, is what would be added back with worm castings. Conventional farming methods have really, stripped our soils of a lot of nutrients.
Absolutely. That leads me to, we have a question from someone who's watching right now, Maria Eugenia, and she asked, since you know a lot about worms and perhaps a little off topic, but she had heard some time ago that there were some worms that eat plastic in a way that they could recycle it, and others that could actually create plastic. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't actually. That's kind of new to me. I mean, I think worms can pretty much, they're like a big vacuum, so they work things in and they grind it down and they excrete it. So if it's small enough, it's going to go through. So maybe it may seem that that's what's happening. I'd have to look into that. That doesn't sound familiar to me.
It would be hard to believe. I only know my husband is a chemical engineer, and he started his career in plastics.
Mm.
And believe me, I am no expert in the world of plastics, but I've heard at least some of the conversations that he's had about it. And I know from him, plastic's inert. So, what you had just finished talking about was the nutritional value that even worms need in order to give us, good vermicompost.
Right.
And so if there's no nutrition going in, it's hard to believe that there would be anything beneficial coming out.
Right, exactly. And if you're feeding, I don't know if you'd be feeding pure plastics, but if there's no microbial population, the worms aren't going to be interested in it.
Yeah.
The only thing I could think of is maybe the biodegradable bags. Maybe as part of the composting
Mm,
process that stuff breaks down. But
that's true.
I don't know anyone that's experimented with that.
Hmm. So, with any new concept or idea, there's often a lot of myths associated with it. And I know in some of our previous conversations, we've chuckled a little bit about some of the things that people think about when they think about vermicomposting. But can you help us debunk some of the common myths that are associated with vermicomposting? Some of the things that I know drive you completely crazy because they're just simply not true.
Right. Let's see. Well, I remember reading one a while ago, something about the liquid that well, it's a lot of them have to do with the liquid that you collect.
Yeah.
So let me just say, worms do not urinate, and the moisture that you're extracting from the bottom of your worm bin is not urine, and it's also not worm extract. It's leachate, like I mentioned before. So
So
that's
there is no worm pee. Worms do not pee.
no, no.
Okay.
The only moisture that's collecting at the bottom is the moisture from your bin from natural
Okay.
decomposition of your food scraps or whatever you're using, or as well as obviously worms have mucous membranes and things like that
Yes.
that they use obviously, but the actual urine, it's an organism that's not exactly like the rest of the animal kingdom. So
Sure.
that's one that goes hand in hand obviously with the worm tea, which is not leachate, and that's a huge one because there's a lot of organizations like myself that really make it a point to try to create a high quality product, and we find that that's
Yeah.
extremely important because if you're getting a great result with one bag, you should hopefully get a similar result with a second. Otherwise, it makes it very difficult for you as a gardener or farmer to try to simulate those ideas. So,
Absolutely.
there's a lot. I applaud people vermicomposting, having their bucket at home, and all those things. But for the people out there that are trying to make a quick buck, by throwing whatever they can find into those buckets and taking that liquid from the bottom and selling it as some sort of a worm tea. I find that personally very irresponsible, and it's just not helping the industry. And what's going to happen is customers are going to buy that product, and something's going to go wrong, and then the whole industry gets thrown under. So, I would suggest people, it's really not that complex to come up with at least a minimal quality product. But do your research. I mean, the internet's one of the greatest inventions out there.
Yes.
I love it. It just like anything else, it can be abused. And don't forget, there's no censoring really on the internet. So just because an article is out there doesn't mean it was written by someone who knows what they're talking about. That's what I always tell people. So I always find multiple resources. If I'm trying to look up
Yes.
something, I'm reading multiple sources and then zoning in on my own opinion eventually. So, and then you'll notice by doing that will naturally debunk some things that you may find in the beginning.
Well, I know one of the things that is a source of pride for you is that you've really tried to differentiate yourself in terms of your service, your process, and your product that you provide to your customers. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I think it's actually great. I think we're at a cross point in the U.S. anyway. I mean, Europe is kind of in a different, moving differently. They've already gone very green. They still have some ways to go. But I think kind of with the advent of GMO products and people focusing on that and health and getting more of these articles written and videos, I think people are starting to perk their ears up. And as part of that, you see a lot of little companies popping up all over the United States that are offering a service where they charge a resident for giving them a bucket and taking the food scraps and then giving it to a composting facility and then giving them some compost back, which is great. That there's not, we always encourage when everybody's doing that. When I was thinking about establishing the business as part of the mission I mentioned before, we thought about the high quality product part, and having been in marketing and investing in everything before, I'm also huge on customer service and consistency with that. So when I was thinking about how to establish this business, I wanted to be a little bit different from from those businesses. And I think where we differentiate is we really took time to come up with the proper bucket that should be used at home. Because if you're giving, just I think a lot of little businesses are going out and just getting like a painter's bucket. And you're going to basically cause the issues I mentioned from my college roommate's sister, which is you throw that stuff in there and you cover it just like you do in the garbage. You ever notice you throw some leftovers in the garbage and a couple days later you're like, what's that smell? That's because you're putting it in a plastic bag and you're closing the garbage can. Now you don't want to leave it open either because you get fruit flies and all that stuff. So
Well, or you have a big dog like I do, and then your dog gets into it. I made a turkey last week, and I didn't use the gizzards, and I forgot, and I put them in the garbage, and I had it all over my kitchen when I got home. I
so he
so
didn't eat
mad at
everything.
myself.
He could at least eat everything and be respectful about it if he's gonna
I
do
Yeah, well, he didn't.
it. Well, so we focused on we did some testing at home, and to my wife's chagrin, I'm sure, and but finally zoned in on the right bucket that is aerated. We use compostable liners and things like that, and we have no smell. I mean, I can put my nose above that bucket, and maybe once in a while you smell maybe like some coffee or something like that, but it doesn't smell, which is really great. So it's not naturally decomposing because it's got the air. It does have a lid, but it's aerated, so there's no fruit fly issues or anything like that. So we focused on that because as part of the educating and also the service that we offer, as I mentioned before, we want to make signing up a person is not that hard. I think everyone's willing to always give something a shot, but 2 weeks in, if it's disgusting or smelly, people are going to give up on it and say, you know what, I'm going to let somebody else fight that fight. So we're not going to work this hard to write articles and educate and just to drop the ball on simple things. So we really focused on that angle. We, like I said, with the vermicomposting side, we don't take those food scraps every week and then go to a farm or some other compost place and say, hey, here you go. Here's our food scraps. Let me know when you're done with that, and then we'll give some compost back to the customer. Because the problem with that is kind of goes back to my quality control, which is, local composters do a fantastic job composting, and that's great. But from our purpose of having a quality product, I don't know what I would be getting back from the composters. They probably are accepting everything from local leaves, branches, and as I said, those could be chemically treated. Maybe they're not chemically treated. If they're accepting food waste, they're probably accepting all food waste, which is great. Like I said, if in creating a compost as such and converting all that is fantastic. And then if you sell that product, that's great too. But there's also a difference in different quality products. We're focusing on a high quality product, so I wanted to take all that stuff under my wing. Plus, I find it interesting, and I wanted to be part of creating that product. So, we see everything from beginning to end. I know what goes in there. I know what comes out. Yep. And we're giving a very refined, maybe we're not giving back 20 pounds of compost, or we give back 5 pounds of worm castings, but that's a lot more concentrated and pure than 20 pounds of compost would be. So, like I said, we love our competition. We love that everyone should jump on board, but our specific model, I think, is very focused, and hopefully, our customers will appreciate that.
It absolutely is, and I wanted to also pick your brain a little bit because you've mentioned the vermicompost conference that you went to. What are some of the key takeaways when you bring together some of the leading thinkers on this methodology? What are some of the things that you took away from that conference?
More and more studies are being done on vermicompost. What I have learned is that the composting industry has been pushing for years and years for standards and quality control of composting products, and it's always hard when you're educating and when you're trying to establish a standard.
Yes.
Vermicomposting, it's been around, but it's had its ups and downs. So I think it's kind of being pushed to the side. I think the people and companies that are vermicomposting are trying to come up with some sort of a standard amongst ourselves. We don't think the rest of the U.S. and even the composting council we're probably not at the forefront of their list right now, but I think as time goes on, I think we'll be pushing for that.
Yes.
More and more studies are coming out, predominantly by universities. As I mentioned before, Cornell University, the University of Hawaii as well, that's doing a lot of research that we try to stay on top of, and they do germination rates. They've done studies where they soak the seeds in warm cast or vermicompost extract, and the results are amazing. I mean, they're really good, and I'm going to be starting our sort of our own experiments as well. We have tons of things written down that I want to test that haven't even been thought of yet. But one thing's for sure, that a good high quality worm castings product or a vermicompost product used properly, for starting seeds as well as planting anything from plants, flowers, perennials, annuals, as well as edibles, has a lot of benefits.
And a lot of potential that people aren't aware of yet, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of my process as well. Along with many other people that I've come across, over the years through the conferences and just networking in general. We try to educate out there. A lot of people don't even think. As soon as you mention manure, I don't think of worm castings as manure. Right? Manure is really from grass eating animals, cows and such. But people always kind of have that, whenever you think of any sort of an excrement, but when you think of soil, what is soil? I mean, soil is basically a breakdown of rocks, minerals, branches, leaves, things that have naturally decomposed, and worm castings, essentially. I mean, that's what soil is. So the way we look at it is we're creating a product that nature has figured out the most efficient way to create, ideally, in order to continue its growth. And I don't think we can beat nature at what it can do, most efficiently. So why not try to emulate it?
Absolutely. When I thought about doing this interview, I kept thinking about my reaction to throwing away a pop can or a newspaper. I would never do that now. And that, as a child of the 70s, where, we had the littering commercials, and we actually have 2 recycle bins, like ginormous bins in our garage compared to one garbage can, because we recycle that much with a family of 4 children.
Right.
But I think for vermicompost and this industry, it's getting people to begin to see food waste in the same way that we see a lot of our plastics and papers. And one of the things I think you do a really great job with is how you use social media, because you're really not only trying to build brand awareness, but you're also trying to educate people about what you're about and how it can actually change the world.
Right.
So, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your social media strategy, how you like to use social media, some of the things that you do, that I know there are a lot of people in the gardening industry that don't utilize social media to its fullest extent, and yet I see you all over the place, the logo and your face, and I think you do a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a lot of time goes into that. It's very I try to be very thoughtful about it, because social media can be good and it can be bad, and you have to be very careful. If you're coming off as a person on social media, it's different from a business.
Yes.
Mine is a little kind of a hybrid in between, because I also write for the blog under Earthworm Tech, which is essentially sort of my alias for it, and is also the alias for myself and the business on all social media. So when I came up with the name and the logo, as we mentioned before, I also thought of being very consistent in my names for across all social media platforms. I think that's very important to just constantly establish that brand recognition. And I urge other people and other businesses that are looking to expand in social media to really spend time figuring out the nuances of each platform, because they're very different, and the demographics that you might hit are also very different. Pinterest
Yes.
is extremely different from Twitter, and the tactics that you may use to educate on Twitter may not be correlative to using on Pinterest.
Yes.
Uh, so I suggest people don't just start shotgunning everything out there, because you make one mishap on social media. The great thing about social media is it's really great for expressing an idea or even a theme or a mentality, which is what we're trying to do. Our philosophy. We kind of go beyond what we're doing as well. I tend to tweet about the environment, even so, and then on Pinterest, I might pin things that are about upcycling. We have a Pinterest board that's very popular, as well as a community that we are building on Google Plus for repurposing things for the garden. So we've seen a lot of repurposing things in general, upcycling, but how do I turn that palette into something that I can use in the garden? You can turn it into a raised bed.
Yes.
You can use old tires as paint them and make them containers outside. So there's a lot of cool things you can do there. But you have to know all the nuances of the different platforms in order to utilize them and maximize your effectiveness. So that's something that as soon as I thought of the company and as soon as I thought of the company and its operations, the first thing that came out was the mission and social media. Immediately I started focusing on that, because it also takes time to build a following and to become known in the various platforms for what you particularly stand for. And we're not quite at a point where we're selling our product online yet. We will soon. But we right now I'm really just educating. I mean, there's really no returns for me other than that. And I think if you're true and honest and just show your passion throughout your social media, everything else will come. Because the most important is to have followers that truly believe what you have to say, and then everything goes through word of mouth from there. So I think these are probably things. I'm not a super expert, but these are things that I tend to kind of grasp onto.
Absolutely. Now, I know we talked about how you enjoy helping people who want to do vermicompost on their own, but also helping businesses that currently are composters and need support. And you do something that's maybe a little bit different from a lot of people in the industry. You're very accessible, and you offer a 20-minute consultation via Skype to these individuals to walk them through their process and maybe how they can take it to the next level, maybe get scale or learn from what you're doing.
Right.
Share with us a little bit about the service that you offer.
Yeah, this is something that I, kind of, it's fairly new. I try to be somewhat innovative in the different things that I think, I see a problem and I try to come up with a solution. And as part of the social media and all the blogging and the things that we do, we get a lot of questions in general, and a lot of times when you're doing things at home, even before I started this business, when I was gardening myself, and maybe it's a new plant that you haven't dealt with, or you got a plant that you were excited about, and you didn't think about your zone,
Yeah.
and you have something that just is in dire straits, and you're going on the internet and you're Googling, and one person says this and the other person says the opposite, and you have no idea what you're doing. And especially with vermicomposting, I've come across this, people doing kind of the home bins, and they're like, my worms are all gone, what happened, or I have too much moisture, or what are these little, these other little bugs, are they going to kill my worms? And, it's a little nerve-wracking, because you don't want to kill your whole population. It does cost depending on where you live, 30, 40, $25, $40 per pound of worms and things like that. So, we're always very accessible on all our social media platform. I posted a nice graphic on Facebook saying, hey, you have any gardening questions, just shoot me, just post something on Facebook, and I try to stay on top of these things. And then most recently I thought, what if I created a little consulting, sort of 15 minutes, $20 for 15 minutes. You can pay through PayPal. Shoot me a question. I'll let you know honestly whether it's something that's answerable, and we get on Skype and we just discuss. And sometimes a person might just want to be like, "Hey, what's going on in this bin?"
Yeah.
Which is easier to see sometimes, or talk, or converse like we're doing, as opposed to shooting me a message, which goes back and forth, back and forth. So I thought that might be an interesting thing to offer to people. It's very easy, this kind of new techie world that we live in.
The worm doctor, right?
Yeah, don't worry. Oh, yeah. Oh, I think he just came up with a nickname.
Well, I know you mentioned before we go, I want to make sure that we highlight you. I know that you write for your blog, and you do write a lot of articles about all the things that you're passionate about. Do you want to share just a couple of them that maybe are top of mind for you, and then we'll make sure we put links to them on the show notes?
Sure. Yeah. I have a book, an agenda that I keep, and every time I think of an idea, I start writing it down. Like, I have to blog about this, and so unfortunately, with all the things that we talked about, the blogging has kind of pushed it aside for now, because I have so many articles I want to write. But some of the I try to think, as I mentioned, kind of out of the box. And one that I wrote recently that I think's gotten a lot of hype is, we've had all this snow and all this ice, and people have cabin fever, and we're all antsy for the spring to get here, and where those first crocuses. In fact, that was
Yes.
one of the things I tweeted, like dying to see this crocus. Um, but in thinking that, I thought, it's snowing and snowing, and we're complaining about the snow, but how can we use this snow? Why don't we just focus on what we have and deal with it? So I wrote an article on basically, I think I called it. Is Jack Frost snowing on your gardening parade? So that one was I think interesting. People can obviously read the article, but try to come up with some ideas of what you could do with that snow, including, well, depending on where you live, harvesting that snow into a rain barrel and using it as natural rainwater source when you need it later on. People don't really think about this, but ideally, especially from a vermicomposting standpoint, dechlorinated water is ideal, because if you think about municipal water, what they put in that stuff, and for a reason, chlorine, chloramine, all those things kill bacteria, and of course they will also kill bacteria in your worm bin, which is what the worms like to eat on. It's not detrimental at all, but to the extent that you can always make your system more efficient, why not? And especially if you've got, I think, 48 inches of snow buildup out there, you might have more, actually, I think.
Oh my gosh, we did. We just got nailed with another like 3-4 inches, and then I just heard tonight we're getting more. So
Yeah, it's
it's
brutal.
not. Minnesota's a sad place for gardeners right now. Everybody's got pent up demand to get in the garden again. So
Are you zone 5?
well, depending on where you're at, we're zone 4B, right where I'm at.
Mm.
So yeah,
So a greenhouse, I guess, then, huh?
yes, yes.
Well, so I wrote that article. I think people found it amusing. I wrote an article back in the fall, things that you could do in the fall, and as I said, I try to be efficient in my gardening too. So, one of the things I had mentioned, for instance, was when you're going around and you're pulling all your old flowers, your annuals, and all that stuff. Think about the reseeders in your garden. So, I like Rudbeckia. I have many different kinds, and a lot of times you take the flower, let it dry, maybe take the seeds, or most people will actually just buy new seeds. They're actually pretty cold hardy, or at least for zone 6. So I tend to actually kind of dig a little soil and spread them in as I go, and cover them, and next year I don't have to do a whole lot. So just some tips like that. I actually have an article that's been dragging, but it's almost done. It's a little bit late, but it was about basically recycling your Christmas tree. A lot of times we cut those beautiful Christmas trees. Unfortunately, just literally for a holiday season, which is kind of terrible in a certain way when you think about it. But that's and that's fine. Those are cultural things we do. And
Yep.
I have a huge 8-foot tree myself, but it feels so bad, after 3-4 weeks, I'm like, I can't do something with this. So I'm writing an article currently about how you can use that tree after the holidays several different ways.
Yes.
Cutting the branches and using it to cover your planters,
Yeah.
stripping the pine needles and using that as incense, for instance.
Yeah.
Putting the tree outside for the birds to have some shelter, things like that. So
Yes.
that
Yep.
will be posted soon.
My mom and dad always take their tree and they'll find some brush when they're in the woods and they always put it underneath the bird feeder because otherwise the birds are kind of out in the open and exposed, and this way if it's under the bird feeder they've got a place to,
Right.
to get away from the predators that are on the lookout for them as well.
And
So,
even better if you're able to jut that tree in the middle of the lawn so
oh
no,
yes.
no one can get to it.
I've
Um,
got a neighbor that whenever it's time to get rid of the tree, they put it on their curb, but they always put it upright. And so when the garbage trucks come through, they never take the tree because they think it's a real tree.
oh, that's funny.
Yeah, so then they end up with it until about April or May, and then they figure out they better get something done. So,
They
but
can they can
go ahead.
strip it. They can strip it and use the pine needles for the blueberry bushes because it's very acidic.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that's a great idea. I like that one.
Yeah, I think we'll do that this year as well.
That's awesome. So let's end the show by talking about how people can contact you. Give us your website, kind of where they can find you on social media, that kind of thing.
Sure. So, our website is www.earthwormtechnologies.com, and the blog is also on there. It's you can see it's Earthworm Tech's gardening blog.
Okay.
As far as social media, it's fairly simple. It's basically Earthworm Tech, ending in TEC, not TECH.
Yes.
Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, although on Instagram I have to say we're not active yet, but we will be. And YouTube, which I will be starting to do videos shortly as well. On Google Plus for Plus Earthworm Technologies, the full
Okay.
name. And I think those are the main social media outlets that we use.
Okay.
That's enough, really.
That is enough. Well, as usual, what we'll do is we'll put links to all of the things that you've referenced in the show notes for the show, and that's all available at sixfootmama.com under the menu heading Still Growing Podcast. And you can find this show, and it will be episode SG521. So, Stephen, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show tonight. That was super fun. I think we did it, right?
It was, I think so. Did everything tape?
I think it is. I'm going to hit stop broadcast, and
Perfect.
we'll get a chance to look at it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I feel very honored to be your first video interviewee.
In my first Google Plus Hangout, live on the air. Thanks
Great.
again.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right. Good night.
Have a good night.